Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Perspective Philosophy, where we try to better our perceptions of the world through philosophical discussion. So, in today's episode, I'm going to be responding to. Is it there? That tweet? No, that tweet. No, that tweet. There. That one. Because, I think that Shuan Head is wrong about that. And it's actually a really common mistake to make in philosophy. So, I thought that rather than just getting mad on Twitter, as I would normally do, and spend hours wasting my life on a platform which I truly, truly loathe, but, establish my identity nonetheless, as all of us need to, I thought I would explain why it's wrong. So, yeah. And I'm glad you like the new intro, and hello, everyone. Thanks very much. It's a great intro. It's made by Cartoon Network, man. Anyway, so, if you want to look at that tweet. So,
getting mad
on
Twitter,
my god, it's me. Okay, so we are natural meat eaters. No, we're not. But let's just imagine we are. So we are natural meat eaters. We are not natural animal guys. We bang our own species. There's no reason to bang animals except for some kind of hedonist, unless you're some kind of hedonistic freak. Well, one, there's a few things to come in there. I mean, assuming hedonism isn't some sort of hedonistic freaks aren't natural, right? That's one thing, right? Animals typically act on that impulses and desires without, moral qualms in the first place. So, if an animal did want to have sex with another species, they would do it, and that would be natural. But moreover than that, when we talk about something being natural and that being a justification, we should think about it, whether this is a real justification. So think of it like this. Vaccines are not natural. Yet, Shoe on Head, I'm assuming, is pro-vaccination. I hope to God that Shoe on Head is pro-vaccination, and, the corona vaccine is a good example of that. Or how about, flying, driving cars, using toilets, not living in the woods. All of these things are artificial or unnatural. Yet we would not say that these are necessarily bad or wrong. And on the inverse, can we say that all natural behaviors are good? Now, I retweeted this and said that, cannibalism, rape, murder are all natural behaviors, at least for some species. And in this case, would this justify these behaviors? Now, I don't believe it would. And there's a reason I don't believe it would. And the reason actually was pointed out by a philosopher called David Hume back in the 17th century, when he wrote a treatise on human nature and the inquiries on human nature. Yeah. Or human understanding. I'll have to double check that. But essentially, David Hume argues that we should not derive an ought from an is. So, what is deriving an ought from an is? Now, an ought statement is something prescriptive. It's saying you should do something that in order, so an example would be, you should eat meat. Okay? Now, to say that you should eat meat is a prescriptive statement. It's to prescribe a behavior. Okay? It tells you to do something. Now, an is statement is descriptive. It's not prescriptive. A descriptive statement is something like humans eat meat, or it is natural to eat meat, or eating meat is good for you, right? That one's a little bit tricky, but we'll get on to that in a second. So these are descriptive statements. So in saying that something is descriptive, how do we arrive to a prescriptive statement? Where does the ought come from? Now, David Hume famously pointed out that the ought cannot be found in the original statement. There is nothing that necessarily leads on to an ought statement from an is statement. So if I said, humans are meat eaters, therefore humans should eat meat, there's no reason that the first statement logically follows from the second statement. Now, I'm actually a moral objectivist, so I think that there are is statements that can lead to ought statements. But those is statements have to be functional. You have to say that it is in the function of a human that humans must or should eat meat to describe what a human is. that it is the function of a human. So without actually giving the description of a human performing this action, performing an action like this and doing it well, you wouldn't be able to essentially describe humanity. So, for example, humans are naturally like maternal or something like that, or female humans are naturally maternal. That doesn't necessarily tell me that they ought to be. But if I was to say that to describe what a mother is would be to describe, caring for a child, well, that would be accurate. I can't have the description of a mother without talking about the prescriptive behavior of a child. And if I talk about what it means to be a good mother, it's in relation to that function. Okay. Now, I think that this is probably what Siobhan Head is trying to trying to associate it with. She believes that the function of a human is to eat meat. She thinks that it benefits us in some way, that it's in our interests. Now, not only is this wrong, in many ways, it is actually linked to our number one causes of death, but also humans can exist and thrive on a vegan diet. And this is being shown by the British and American dietetics associations and numerous studies at this point. And also, if anyone's interested in climate change and protecting what is the existential interest of humanity to survive and not destroy our own habitat, then veganism is also the way forward for that as well. But one of the things I would say about humans that is, that I think is relevant to this is that humans are ethical by nature. Humans should act ethically. Humans should behave in a way which is quote unquote good in relation to that function. And I would say that to do that, we need to consider everyone's interests. We need to consider the interests of, black people and denounce racism. We need to consider the interests of, my God, we need to consider the interests of women and denounce sexism. We need to consider the interests of, we need to consider the interests of marginalized groups in general. And we need to not perpetuate what would be an egoistical or self-conceited notion of ethics, doing what's in our own interest. This is the function that I would relate partially to human behavior. I wouldn't say it's nature. I'm going to get onto that in a second. I don't think it's human nature, but I think it's a function that we must adopt in relation to actually achieving a good life. Okay, so I don't think that eating meat is compatible with this function. I don't think you can live the good life. You can't be ethical and eat meat. Now, that seems quite controversial. I get it. Like, people probably think that eating meat is a natural, normal, and necessary behavior. We must eat meat because eating meat keeps us healthy. It is normal to eat meat. Everyone eats meat. And was it natural, normal, and necessary, I say? Oh, and yes, and humans have always ate meat. It's something that we've always done. Now, the first thing, natural, right? Like, we'll just start from actually the last thing, whatever. Right, natural. What do we mean by natural in the first place? Now, natural, as Paulo Verno argues, is actually something that is just a historical comparison, usually, to a previous state from which we associate our identity. When I say something is natural, I just mean humans have done this before, or humans have done this continually throughout history. That doesn't make it natural. That just means that we've kept doing it. And what he talks about in this is what's called natural historical diagrams. So when we compare culture to culture, we create a diagram and we try to perpetuate some notion of human nature. Well, in reality, there is no reason to accept this as human nature. There's no reason to accept this as being as a necessary component of what it means to be human. Is a vegan human? Yes. I don't think most people would say that a vegan was actually lacking the component characteristics of humanity. I mean, unless perhaps if they died and they cease to exist, you'd say, well, no, vegans aren't human because vegans are dead. But vegans don't die. Vegans typically live long, healthy, happy lives. And so there's no reason to believe that there is anything unnatural about eating a vegan diet and about living a vegan lifestyle. And the same thing with meat eating. Is there a reason to believe that it is natural to eat meat? There are cultures around the world that have actively rejected the concept of eating meat. In contemporary times, rather, there is, the Adventist vegans. In history, you can look to Buddhists and Sikhs. that have long-standing traditions of avoiding meat, dairy, and eggs. And depending upon the tradition, some are vegan, some are vegetarian, and there's a lot of cultures with this. There's no reason to believe that this behavior is characteristically human, and there's no reason to believe that it's necessary in terms of medicine either, in terms of our physical health and our physiology. In fact, I mean, if you look at something like things like the length of our intestines, the size of our canines, I mean, like a cat, like a tiny little cat has canines about the size of ours. But even if we denounce the fact that canines don't necessarily determine meat eating, we can see that we aren't really very well adapted to eating meat. And we are also able to see that even if we were well adapted to eating meat, we can still thrive, because we're omnivorous, on a plant-based lifestyle. So there's no reason to say that this need be accepted in terms of our behavior. The next thing is normal. Well, like, if we look at history, norms and conventions have never actually aligned with what we actually should do. A lot of the times, norms and conventions have led us astray from what we now know to be ethically right. A good example is slavery. It was normal to own a slave. Or in the past, sexism. It was normal to be sexist. It was normal to see women as lesser than men. The ancient Greeks, for example, thought it was normal to see men as superior to women. And actually, funnily enough, were so far on that point that they believed, many argued that homosexuality was actually a superior form of sexuality because it was two men in a relationship, and men are better than women. And I think that example is just great, because I think it just shows how much norms and conventions can genuinely structure an individual's conceptions of morality. An individual judges right and wrong not based off what is actually right and wrong, but what they have conceived of as right and wrong in relation to the traditions from which they have been raised. Now, in contemporary times, we understand we understand norms and traditions to be around meat eating to be justified. Like, people eat meat. It's totally normal. It's fine. Everyone does it. Now, this was never the case throughout history. Not everyone could actually afford and engage in meat consumption. It wasn't until the birth of factory farming and, people like Bernard Matthews, where meat consumption really became colloquially accepted, as in it was always accepted, I suppose. It was something that was either ritualistic or during a celebration. It wasn't typical day-to-day eating. So most people actually ate primarily a plant-based diet. But in contemporary times, it's something that's normal. It's something that everyone does. But does that make it okay? So let's look at it. Actually, before we look at it, I think it's well to point out that we've pretty much addressed whether it's necessary. Like, do we need meat to survive? Well, no. We don't need meat to survive. I've been vegan now for 6 years. 6 years on the 4th of June. So I'm doing fine. That's pretty great. I mean, that's not a study, but there you go. But there are plenty of studies now showing the health benefits of a vegan lifestyle. And also the British and Dietetics Associations both say it's, healthy and suitable for all stages of life. So there you go. And can even be used to treat some diseases, actually. So there's that as well. So back to the norms and traditions of how we gain ethical judgments. So I think that one of the most important things to look at this is not just, how norms and ethics have actually, let's say, created scenarios, well, how norms have created scenarios which we now characterize to be some of the, most horrific times in the world. For example, the consideration of African Americans, the consideration of Native Americans, the consideration of women, the perpetuation of slavery throughout over 2,000, probably at least 2,000 years from which it existed. Norms don't inform you on what is ethical, but let's look at what would inform you on what's ethical. So when we look at an animal and we decide, should I eat that? Let's look at whether we should eat it. Okay, so most people engage in meat eating and meat consumption for pleasure, let's be honest. And that's why most people eat in general in the Western Hemisphere. We don't, eat, we don't eat to live, we live to eat. And believe me, that is certainly been me since lockdown. I've been so sad, and I just really love to eat these Greek pastries, and they're delicious, and they're covered in glucose syrup, and I love them. And here we are. And and essentially, we live to eat. and we enjoy food, and we do it because it's social. We do it because it brings us, physical pleasure, but it also brings us it brings us relief from emotional pain as well. There are many things socio-politically tied to not meat consumption as well, but food consumption. But meat consumption in particular is associated with things like masculinity, but it's also associated with, indulgent foods, like pizzas and burgers and so on. Now, luckily, in our society, we've managed to make vegan versions of all of these foods, so you can still kill the pain of your existential crisis. Don't worry, June. You can eat your heart out when it comes to, like, if you need to cry and you need Ben and Jerry's, you can get Ben and Jerry's now. Like, believe me, I do it. So it's okay. And that's one aspect of it. But do you need to consume this food? Is it justified for you to put your preferences? Let's say you didn't even like the vegan options. Let's say you hated them. Is it okay to put your preferences over the life of another being? Okay. Now, why would you be able to do that? Is this being of lesser ethical value? Can we say that this, let's say a cow, chicken, pig, whatever it is of such a low ethical status that you do not need to consider its most vital interests in respect to your most trivial? Now, what would have to be different about a cow, about anyone, any human, to justify this treatment of them? Is it intelligence? Can we do this to cows, chickens, and pigs because they are less intelligent? Okay, so this is what's called marginal cases, where I will present marginal cases and you can judge for yourself whether these justify killing this group. Are we justified in killing, let's say, people with learning disabilities because they are less intelligent? Are we justified in killing infants because they are less rational and communicable than adults? What about people with learning disabilities who will never actually develop intelligence comparable, or linguistic capacities comparable to an adult human? What about let's say primates who have all of these capacities? Are they valuable now? And without that, are you justified in killing primates? And then if we are, can you tell me let's say you come to the conclusion, let's say humanity itself is justifiable. What is valuable in and of itself about humanity? Now, these are some of the questions that I think are important to ask ourselves in terms of how we devise our ethics. Because most of us come from an anthropocentric framework. That means that we engage with ethics in such a way in which we value and centralize human existence. We say that humans are valuable. Now, there is no reason, I would argue, to value humans necessarily. I think that we should value humans, but not because they are human. Because there is nothing in being human that is valuable. Except for something that we share with all other animals. And that is the capacity to feel pain and pleasure. Think about it. Every experience of value you have is tied to an approval or dismissal, a positive or negative experience from what you have in your life. Can you suffer if you were just totally numb, if you didn't feel anything, could you suffer? Could you suffer just purely through reason? Like, if you were a computer, does a computer suffer if it doesn't have any feelings? Can it suffer? And I think that this is what really boils down to the foundations of our ethics. That suffering and well-being are the foundations from positive and negative experience from which we build up all ethical discourse. We cannot deny this aspect of ourselves, of our lives, and so we try to investigate what is valuable in and of itself. And I would say that these characteristics are what we must consider in our own experience, and to consider it in our own experience, we require the existence of universals and identities from which we can associate with in order to create rational deductive mechanisms which allow us to investigate what is valuable in and of itself and valuable in our own lives as well. So we need concepts such as pain, pleasure, right and wrong, and so on. And animals contain these concepts. We can look at an animal and see its resistance when we go to hurt it. when we look at an animal and we see it happy. I mean, like I see my dog run around. I know you own rabbits, June. If you do watch this, like, do you deny that your rabbit has value? Like, if someone was to go and cause harm to your rabbit, would you say it was justified if they were going to eat that rabbit? Let's say they weren't doing it for just purely hedonistic pleasure. Let's say they were going to eat your rabbit. Would that be justified? Now, if you reply with, it's not justified because it's my rabbit, would you say somebody else would be justified for killing a rabbit for fun? Just for the sake of it. Not your rabbit, though. Is what makes your rabbit good the fact that it's associated with you? It's valuable because it's associated with you? I don't think so. And I think that the reality of the situation is if we truly look at animals, we would see that what makes them valuable is themselves. In their experiences. They have this experience of pain and pleasure which cannot be denied. And it's something that we must respect in order to understand our own pain and pleasure and understand what is valuable in and of itself. Otherwise, we can fall into things like racism. We can fall into things like sexism. We can fall into things where we consider our own identities, but not the identity and the pain and suffering of another individual. And that is what I hope I can convey within this stream. So, bit of a long introduction, and obviously we'll get into like a Q&A, but I thought that would be a necessary place to start off with, where I just basically outline vegan ethics and why I have a problem with this tweet. Because natural, if used to justify our behaviors, can literally justify anything. Because natural can mean anything a human does. If I define nature and humanity as not being separate, there are plenty of instances in history when they haven't. For example, the ancient Greeks did not see humans and nature as separate. Everything a human does is natural. So, murder, rape, racism, slavery, all of these behaviors could then be seen as natural and therefore justifiable. Now, obviously, I've already went into why it would not, essentially work like that. I've talked about the is-ought gap by David Hume. And also, to briefly mention, there is also the naturalistic fallacy by G.E. Moore, which is less good, but it's there. So yeah, that hopefully explains why this is not acceptable justification for the consumption of meat, dairy, and eggs. Okay. I should be live on Twitch. If I'm not live on Twitch, I don't know why. But yeah, I hope this explains obviously the situation. Anyway, does anyone have any questions before we jump into Twitter again? Don't we love Twitter? PP, the only reason you believe in objective morality is because you've had a good life. You are not looking at things realistically. Okay, I've actually had a fucking terrible life. like, I'm not going into the details. I definitely won't. But I once spoke to a therapist, and they were just sat on the phone, just going, "Oh no, oh no," like everything. They were like, "All right, now tell us about this." And I tell them, and they're like, "Oh no." So nah. I believe in objective. If anything, I think that my experience of suffering has probably enlightened me more to the objectivity of morality, because no matter how much I really wanted to think my way out of pain, it doesn't really work like that. So yeah. Anyway, yeah. So like to get into the original, the true tweet, the tweet of tweets. So it was actually Delaniac. I don't know who Delaniac is. So I don't know who Delaniac is, but on Twitter, and they got like 10,000 votes on this, where people said that essentially I think if I should be able to make this a little bit. There we go. So, time to capitalize on the vegan discourse for engagement. I don't blame you. Absent extenuating considerations, survival, cost, health conditions, is killing an animal for meat morally different than bestiality? Please explain your reasoning below. So, I said no on this. But the final results said that people think it is morally different. Okay. Now, there are actually important moral distinctions in terms of people's behaviors that I think are worth noting. For the fact that it isn't traditional and it isn't normal shows that an individual is willing to break and defy norms in terms of ethics and so do that which we think is already wrong, which is kind of like criminals. Like, they're kind of criminal. Like, bestiality is usually illegal. So that's a moral consideration. But is the harm perpetuated for an animal and is on an animal different, and is the reasoning for which they from which they condone the act different? So I would say it's not. I would say that people engage in this behavior for hedonistic pleasure. They consider themselves and they don't consider the animal. And I would say that is exactly what they do when they consume meat, dairy, and eggs. You consider yourself, but you don't consider the pain, suffering, and death of another sentient being. Okay? It's a trivial interest. You don't need to eat meat, dairy, and eggs, and you can survive happily without it. And so, excuse me. Bloody itchy beard. It's so hot here. Okay. Essentially, you don't need to consume meat, dairy, and eggs, yet, doing it anyway, despite the suffering of another creature, seems to be, to put your interests above that, or your most trivial interests, your pleasure, over the life and suffering of that animal. And to, sexually exploit that animal would be to do the same thing. And a great, the funniest thing is that animal agriculture is the #1 place you can look to for the sexual exploitation of animals anyway within our society. So let's say you don't like the idea of people banging animals, like June doesn't. She doesn't like the idea that people may bang a sheep or a cow or something like that. That probably makes her have a disgust response. At least I hope it does, because I think we can all agree that's absolutely disgusting. And it would be just as bad if someone was, let's say, fisting a cow. But that's exactly what farmers do to artificially inseminate them, essentially, in the first place. So to produce cows, we sexually exploit them in the first place. We sexually exploit female cows in order to produce dairy. Now, and before we even get onto that, and the fact that all dairy has to come from, a lactating mother, a mammal, there is also birds to consider. Chickens lay eggs. These are essentially chicken periods, right? Now, chickens in the wild would have laid about 12 to 30, depending on the species of chicken, eggs naturally. So like once a month to twice a month, average. Or like 2.4 or something it is. Now, chickens today that we, mass produce have been selectively bred and genetically modified to lay an egg a day. An egg a day. Okay. That is a lot of eggs, man. Like, to the point, imagine if you, and I'm saying this to all, all the females or I don't know, what is this? What is the appropriate thing to, people who have periods. In chat, do you think that having a period every day would take it out of you? Do you think, anyway, do you think that it would be difficult? Do you think it would hurt? Do you think it would cause you suffering to have that many periods? Would you feel drained? Imagine how much chocolate you would have to consume. No. Sorry, I'm just winding my girlfriend up. But
Michael Lasky donated £15.
Oh, thank you very much, Michael. I really appreciate it. Imagine the pain and suffering this would actually cause you. It is very much considerable. But for chickens, it's even a little bit worse, because chicken periods require a considerable amount of calcium. They come in eggs, right? Like, they actually lay a hard egg, right? They don't lay, like, we don't lay eggs. Our species has, essentially other mechanisms. It's just goo. They lay hard shells, and those shells are actually made of calcium. And that calcium's got to come from somewhere. They've got to actually consume that calcium to produce that egg. And since they are producing so many eggs, they don't have enough calcium to produce these eggs. And so they start leaching calcium from their own bones. And so they end up breaking their own limbs because of how many eggs they're producing. Okay? And then once they cannot produce these eggs anymore, once they are incapable of producing and laying these eggs, then they are murdered. They have their throats slit and they are fed to someone for their pleasure. And so same thing happens with dairy cows. They can't produce milk anymore, then they're off to slaughter if they're not even producing enough milk anymore. And this is even considering the fact that not only has the mother been sexually exploited and artificially impregnated by a human who legit fists this cow, they also then take not only and also let's point out actually the pain of pregnancy. Okay, I don't think many women would be okay with being pregnant round the clock, especially getting raped and impregnated against their will around the clock. That sounds absolutely vile, right? Right, and humans, it is different, being aware of how rape actually impacts, humans. It is different. But at the same time, the physical toll is the same. The physical exploitation of that creature is the same. It takes it out of them. And it causes infections, and it can lead to some pretty nasty consequences for them. Prolapses, some nasty stuff, right? Which can become infected themselves and harm that creature. And then once they give birth to this baby, cows typically have a maternal response. They don't actually want to see this baby get taken away. They want to look after it. They're mammals. They want to look after their young. Most mammals do. And this creature is then snatched away because it will drink the milk that is meant for us. Because that calf would drink the milk that the mother produces for it. And so we take it away. Now, it's either usually slaughtered within the first few months. In Britain, we've gotten rid of the, just on the day it was born, slaughtering recently. But in the first few months, it'll still be killed because it won't be profitable. That, or it'll be raised as a dairy cow, and exactly the same thing will happen to her. So, if you're against the sexual exploitation of animals, then I certainly recommend that you be against meat, dairy, and eggs. Okay. So, as you can see, it is pretty nasty. And obviously when we talk about bestiality, there seems to be this notion that people who commit this behavior are worse because it is, usually a bit perverse. We could say that the individual has something wrong with them to have this desire. It's not an atypical desire in society. But let's just imagine the consequences of, let's just compare the consequences. We can see the consequences are akin. Okay, we can see that there's harm done for pleasure on both sides. Okay, but what's different is the perversity of the agent, whether the agent's engaging in behavior from which you do not condone, which is understandable. I also feel uncomfortable, hearing about someone who wants to have sex with cows. Really weird. But yet we will be okay. I just want you to imagine this thought experiment. There is a person who wants to have sex with cows, who really likes the idea of it, who talks about it, sexualizes cows and stuff, they're a fairy or something, I don't know, and they don't, but they don't actually do it. They may dress their partner up as a cow, and that's the kind of thing that they're into, okay? And we would probably think of them as perverse and weird. Now we have someone who engages in quote-unquote normal sexual activity, whatever the fuck that means in society today, and is not sexualizing cows, but they buy milk. And in buying milk, they perpetuate the sexual exploitation of cows. Which do you think is worse? So we're going to move on to a nice Q&A portion now, because I've been ranting non-stop for 35 minutes. So we're going to just talk about whether you guys think that, whether it's comparable. How would you answer this poll? Would it be yes or would it be no? One's for yes, two for no. Come on, chat. Two. We have 1, 2. Well, I'm glad that... Not 2. I don't know what the latency is on this. 2. 3, 2 so far. Is there anyone who thinks 1? Okay. 1.5. 1.5 I get, I think. Because then you're saying, like, okay, there is, like... I think there is a difference in how the individual themselves is constructed and able to engage with the question. It's like someone's perverse, someone's performing an action which would be usually condemned, so they're performing something which we would think of as unethical atypically. But you know, the consequences are still the same, so it's not a full 1. Yeah. Yes means that that it's morally different to essentially killing an animal for meat than bestiality. That meat consumption and bestiality are morally separate. 2, killing is worse in some sense. Yeah, I guess it is in some senses. I think it's obviously at the same time. I think that's it's the peak of objectification. I think the irony of it is that when we look at sexual exploitation, some people would go, you know, I'm not just a piece of meat. You know, what we would use as the epitome of objectification would be what happens in animal agriculture. You know, my chat is actually really big. I've just realized I'm gonna make this chat like a little bit smaller, guys. There you go. Can I just quickly oh, thank you. Alright, there we go. I think that should be a bit better. Okay, I think 1.5 makes sense. I think 2 makes sense. 1 though. So, Lysocracy. I hope I'm saying your name properly. Why 1? Walt, you say 1. Donald, you say 1 too. Donald. I feel betrayed. Donald. So, 1s. Why did you say 1? Like Walt said, 1 because the actions of both impact subjectivity in massively different ways, which we seem to share an axiomatic value of. 1, I hate this axiomatic value nonsense. I don't know what the hell that means, man. Like, I hear people say this all the time. I don't know what anyone means by axiomatic value. Like, we share the axiomatic value. Do you mean like we share like a cultural understanding that bestiality is wrong? We share the norm. Yeah, we share the norm. Bestiality is wrong. Okay, so that means like I can understand. That means it's like breaking some conventions. It's perverse, you know. But then we could look at other perverse things in history and maybe not see them as necessarily being wrong in and of themselves. So, for example, homosexuality was associated with perversion. Does that make homosexuality wrong? Like, would you have been wrong to be homosexual? Or trans. Trans was seen as, and is seen by many, as perverse. Does that necessarily mean that it is, you know, in terms of these norms and conventions, wrong? Or is there something about it that makes it wrong, worse? I think if you were to say that, look, it's just as bad, but like it's worse because an individual knows it's bad. I get that. Like, I do get that. But all right. So you're saying one because it's worse to kill the animal. Okay, okay, that's an interesting take, Donald. I think I like that. I like it. I like that take. I will say that. That's actually not too bad. I get you. You're actually interpreting it. Yes, it is morally different. Meat eating's worse. Never expected that response. Okay. No, I like it. I like it. It's an interesting take. Yeah, I could see why someone would argue that. I do. And do Donald. Yeah, absolutely, man. I think I get that. I mean, I don't necessarily think it. Well, actually, yeah, I do think. I think it is worse in some respects. Yeah, but I think that the individual themselves is less culpable for their actions because they're ideologically indoctrinated into a system from which prevents them from seeing the harm that they commit. Most people just, go to a shop, buy meat, and don't necessarily understand that they're actually paying for the slaughter and death of another creature. Even though they know it in some level, they don't necessarily connect that action with that purchase. Just like cognitive dissonance, which is me and you'd find Donald. Absolutely, Donald. Don't worry. Everyone, we're gonna kill Donald. No one, please don't hurt Donald. Donald, you're great. But seriously, you're absolutely right. I think that's a really good answer. Very interesting. I didn't assert that the axiom was cultural. In fact, I think it's a minimal standard that we respect other minds. I'm providing a source of rational, universal, ethical value. So, wait a minute. You think that the... right, so you're not just saying that it's about bestiality. You're saying that it's something about how we respect other minds. And if I was to say animals have other minds and we're not respecting them, because higher order theories of consciousness have been all but debunked time and time again. I just don't think there's a reason to accept something like a linguistic conception of consciousness. And I would even say that, for that to even occur, there'd have to be some sort of pre-linguistic system which would allow communication to develop in order to have this engagement, which means we'd have to be able to have a common conscious domain in order to create a linguistic system in the first place to essentially reference. Because linguistics is referential. We reference an object. If that object has to exist somewhere and consciously. So, yeah. Would you rather be stabbed or killed? Would you rather stab, perform animal abuse, or kill a cow, or have it killed for you if you want to remove the sexual component? Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like, how much harm are you committing there? I mean, I do think that so for example, it's like being indoctrinated. An individual might think that they're not doing the wrong thing. It's like people in the Crusades, it's not wrong to kill an infidel as they were, indoctrinated into. And I think that's what meat eaters are indoctrinated into today. A lot of people, like actually one of my friends who's doing a PhD in philosophy, he got quite upset the other day because I said that I compared meat eating to the Hitler Youth. I think that Nazis who are indoctrinated from being born to kill Jews wouldn't necessarily have seen them as having moral value. They've been told their whole lives that these are the enemy, that they're there, that the Germans are superior, and they get given a narcissistic ethic. Nazism as itself is a perversion and should never have came around in the first place. And the fact that they were willing to perpetuate these ethical myths was deliberate. But people who are indoctrinated into it might not have seen it as necessarily unethical to perform these actions, at least not according to the norms and conventions. And it's the same thing with meat eaters. We don't necessarily see in our society people understanding the consequences of their actions as having any ethical value in the first place, because they're not even considering the fact that ethics could be applied to non-human animals. They've already assumed an anthropocentric framework, and when you talk about ethical consideration of animals, they don't understand what you're talking about. I think that engaging in bestiality is ultimately immoral because they are unable to consent. though the vast majority of instances are mostly outright cruel towards the animal, inflicting pain upon them. I completely agree. I think the capacity for consent is vitally important here, and the notion of consent is vitally important here. What is consent? Consent is in and of itself respecting the will of the other, respecting their wishes, their desires, their interests. Not defying or forcing them into a scenario which would ultimately harm them and disrespect their freedom, their autonomy. And that's exactly what animal agriculture does. From birth, it births animals into a form of slavery, raises them in that environment, and then slaughters them. And, along the way, tortures and exploits them. But we don't see that. But if we were to put humans in this scenario, what we essentially end up with is something very much akin to the Holocaust. And this isn't controversial really for saying. I mean, I don't think I'm being controversial for saying this, considering that those who perpetuated the Holocaust looked towards animal agriculture and the technology used in animal agriculture for the slaughtering of animals as a way to slaughter Jews. They actually looked towards a similar technology. So if you were to put humans in that scenario, we're going to find a very similar circumstance. Obviously, there was other tortures that were done to the individuals within concentration camps that aren't done to animals. For example, psychological tortures, people being singled out and then told to pick who will die or volunteer to die, otherwise I'll kill everyone else. And then they do it and then they kill everyone else anyway. That kind of horrible stuff. Like the genuinely evil. Like the perpetuation of evil in the Holocaust is undeniable. But the overall technique and mass slaughtering is very similar. And I think it's done for the same reasons, actually. I would make the argument that the Holocaust was an act of capitalist expression. It was the paranoid, impulsive delusion of the Nazis, who were acting in a way which I would consider as culturally psychotic. Lacking impulse control would be like one of the symptoms. And I would say that they were they had lost grip with reality in terms of their ethical norms and conventions. They had rejected them and accepted a myth which had no rational foundation, like the stabbed in the back myth and so on. And perpetuated this capitalist excess. They gave into their desires to the highest degree. They tried to, even despite the fact that it was bad for the war effort, despite the fact that it probably lost them the war, they, engaged in the Holocaust. The same excess we can see in animal agriculture, perhaps not at the same extent and not psychologically as perverse, obviously, as Nazism, especially how it came around, but we can see the same excess and the same consideration of self and identity over the identity of another. These comparisons, I think, are very, very easy to see, and I'm not the only one who sees them, actually. Numerous vegans make this point, but there was Alex Hirschkraft, who's the founder of Farm, the longest animal rights association in the United States, is a survivor of the Holocaust. And he grew up in the Warsaw Ghetto. Yeah, that's not a bad idea. Yeah, I'll probably play it. I'll play Alex Hirschkraft. But yeah, he grew up in the Warsaw Ghetto. He experienced the horrors of like what the Nazis did, and lost family members to extermination camps. And then after the war, visited Auschwitz after he was smuggled out and survived, I think, by the Polish resistance. But very fortunately, he nearly got caught along the way and lived years in an Italian refugee camp before moving to the United States and getting a PhD in chemistry. And eventually had to go to essentially test the waste from a slaughterhouse. And when he was there, he saw a pile of hearts and lungs and hooves. And instantly, he associated that image with what he had seen at Auschwitz. And he wasn't the only person who did that. He references a Nobel laureate, actually, who had the same experience. So, yeah, I would certainly say that it's a justified association. Her shaft. All right. Sorry, Lewis. My bad. If the Holocaust was an act of capitalist expression, was stopping the Holocaust an act of capitalist expression? I mean, partly I think it was, to be honest. I think that I don't think that capitalism's all bad. Um, but I think that the willingness to exploit another and give in to desires and impulses is characteristic of capitalist excess. I think that it was. I mean, obviously, it's fascism as well, which is obviously it's different. It's it's very much closely related to capitalism. It's very right wing in that respect, but the identity of the society from which is engaged in has become essentially ungrounded. It's become I would argue pretty much they've lost grip with reality. I think, to be honest, with in a realist sense. I don't think they understand themselves. I don't think they understand what's going on. And so when they are engaging in great excess, it's not in the same way as Americans buying cars. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's exploitation involved that's not being considered, but it's, far more perverse. But I do think that it is comparable in terms of perversion, maybe not at the same extent because of the ethics of the time being comparable to understanding an anthropocentric position. Sorry, that is comparable to animal agriculture, and I think our societies have a blind spot to that. Are we not divine beings? No, but I think that we have the necessary capacities. What? Yeah, actually, that's a really good point. My girlfriend was saying there that there's actually I think it was the Archbishop of Canterbury, and Gary Rofsky references this all the time, that if animals could depict humans, if they could depict the devil, they would depict the devil as human because of what we do to them. So in the way we treat animals, we do lack divinity. We actually are the exact opposite. We are unpious. We are unholy. But more than that, I would say that what divinity is, that the concept of divinity, the concept of godliness and goodness exists as a standard for us to meet. And so when we are looking towards something being holy and just and good, and the epitome of what we ought to strive for, I would say that it is always a standard from which we will never achieve, but it is the divinity that within us that makes this all possible. It is the goodness and the willingness to change towards being that way that makes us like gods. We are willing to act and become better people. That is what it means to be, essentially divine, in this sense. Went partially vegan thanks to you, man. Oh, cool, man. Go fully vegan now. Without supplementation, vegan diets cannot provide all B vitamins. Then supplement. There's no real issue why you can't supplement, and we just fortify milks anyway. And most people usually take vitamin tablets, and most people usually have fortified foods. I mean, if you're eating a wheat product, you're having a fortified food. So yeah, Britain made it the law to fortify food. I don't know what. Charlie's tablets. The cows. Oh, you mean the fact that they actually give B12 to cows? Oh, yeah. But I think that they'll say, then if I do bring that up, that ruminants are capable of producing B12 if they're raised organically, on even though that they couldn't support the world's population on that, you know what I mean? And no one's eating that part of a cow anyway, and normally, and they're not going to get like anyway. It's not necessary, but whatever. Anyway, yeah, and then but as well, like, we do believe that, you know, B12 would have been available in water and soil. It's actually a bacteria that you get B12 actually from. It's and you can actually get that same bacteria in supplement form. It's the exact same chemical that you get B12 in the exact same format in the supplement as you would from the animal product anyway. So yeah. Oh, you did go fully vegan. All right, nice, Isaac. Totally misunderstood you there. Yes, hello everyone. I did see vegan gays here. Thank you for modding. Thanks for turning up interspecies. Genuinely, thanks very much, guys. Obviously Donald O'Neill, Dead Rabbit. I don't know if I've seen you here, Dead Rabbit. I might have seen you here before. Hello, nice to meet you. Anyway, Stupid Vegan, have seen you. You know, obviously that's. All right, hiya, Doomer man, how you doing? Love me some B12, absolutely. But yeah, I mean, and never mind, everyone in the world, well, especially everyone in the northern hemisphere, should or anywhere that's not equatorial, should probably be taking like a D supplement as well, vitamin D. So like you can yeah, and I do take you can take sublingual and stuff. It absorbs better. Some people have problem with absorption. It's not really an issue. You can just take a different kind. Honestly, like there's so much that there's no real reason that you have to consume animal products in terms of any vitamins or minerals or anything like that. You can get it all from plants, and it's not even hard to get it from plants these days. The number one form of mineral deficiency in the world is actually anemia, and it's not more prevalent in vegans than in meat eaters and so on. So vegans typically don't really suffer from anemia or anything like that more than meat eaters. And if you are worried about anemia, then you can eat elemental iron, like it'll be in your breakfast cereal. Most cereals are fortified with it. Make sure it's not fortified with vitamin D3. That's the only thing I'd say. You don't want that sheep wool grease. But you can also get iron from like loads of natural sources. Really easy to get it. Same with calcium, not hard to get it. There isn't really anything that is a struggle. And if you were to struggle, let's say you are worried about it, let's say you live in a food desert and you're not going to eat healthy, and by the way, you wouldn't be able to eat healthy anyway in a food desert. That's the point. If you have to, you know, essentially eat an inadequate diet, then you can supplement. So yeah, definitely consider supplementation. I think there's nothing wrong with it, to be entirely honest with you. I think it's probably good for you in general. You don't like salted peanuts. What do you mean you don't like salted peanuts? That's unnatural. Get out of here. Right. Do you think that humans could find certain behaviors innately repulsive? That usually feels to be the claim when people say natural argument. No, I don't think that humans find any behaviors innately repulsive. I mean, you can see people that have been conditioned to which they won't see a lot of behaviors in an innately repulsive way. And you get people who are perverse and different from, like, you know, the norm, quote unquote. And, you know, sometimes, so for example, even like some of the most primitive behaviors, like say, take something like being hurt, like being made to feel pain. Even being made to feel pain in some respects, in certain responses, can lead to a psychological pleasure response in things like S&M relationships and so on. So things like innately repulsive, no, I don't think so. I don't see any evidence for that. And I would even say that human self-understanding in all levels is not natural. I would say that human self-understanding comes from culture, from our concepts from which we apply to ourselves. Am I an anarchist? I'm probably like a libertarian socialist. I would say, I used to say anarchist, but then people tell us that I'm not allowed to believe in a state at all if I'm an anarchist, and I definitely believe in a state because I believe in a central justice system and laws. So yeah. I get repulsed from going outside. That is very much not natural. Exactly. There's phobias and so on. Humans are like the least natural thing ever, man. Well, you know what? You deserve to get dragged for not liking salted peanuts. Everyone should like salted peanuts. That's just the law. Okay. I don't make the rules, right? Eating meat's wrong. Salted peanuts are good. That's how it works. Right? Any experience with time-based fasting along with a vegan diet? I don't really care about any of that. Look, you do you. Um, if you do want to know the science of it, eating in accordance with the circadian rhythm is good for things like weight loss and things like that if you're interested in it. But like, eating in the morning and stuff like that's better than eating at night. So yeah, and people with ADHD have like a delayed circadian rhythm, so I'm probably like, I probably should be eating at like 12 o'clock. I don't know. There is an innate disgust of feces. I think that there's not an innate disgust of it because you get people who are into that, and I think you forget that. So I'd say that there is a rational and typical disgust in that, and I think that's fair. One second. Do you call people that are vegan in the sense of the second order desert not true vegans if they end up having hedonistic feelings but admit it's a failing? What do you mean? Like people who say that, oh, it's wrong to eat meat and then I've done it, like, like an addict or something, like they've fallen back into their bad behaviors. I would say that, like, I wouldn't call them vegan, like, in the sense that I don't think they're actually living up to the standard which they agree with, and I think that they would probably not consider themselves vegan because they're not meeting that standard that they agree is the minimum standard. It's like you wouldn't call yourself like I don't know, like, sober if you take drugs. You might want to be sober and you might, think that being sober is great. But then if you keep taking drugs or drinking and you wish you didn't, that doesn't make you sober. It's innate, but it can be unlearned. That's really debatable. Yeah, there's like not only the question is whether the disgust itself was learned in the first place, which I'd say it typically is. I think that many people have a response to it which is naturally negative, at least in the sense that they smell something that is that causes a negative response inherently, in the sense that it's like, that smells bad, that kind of thing. I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that. But then the fact that it can be modified doesn't show that it shows that like, human behavior and human conceptions of reality are not necessarily tied to natural conceptions in the first place. Do I recommend any delicious vegan dishes? Honestly, you know what? My favorite vegan dish is just chili, like a 3-bean chili or something. But for the best recipe I've seen on chili, like the one I actually enjoyed the most, although I will say it's very sweet and maybe goes over the top a little bit, is the vegan zombies chili recipe. That's the one where it's like it's back when John was in the vegan zombie as well. Some of their old content. That's a really nice. I made that chili, basically followed the whole recipe, which I don't normally do. I usually just make a chili, but like, I followed their recipe and it was actually really nice. It was a really, really nice chili. Well, I agree with that, John Johnson. But then people said that wasn't an anarchist. I mean, I don't know about the idea that you can secede from the state because it relates to property issues and whether an individual's property can be removed from a state and how property rights would work in a state. There's so many things. I think you're going to need like an international, like, kind of meta state so that you could go like, okay, well, this is how the law works for stateless people, and so on. So if like the secede from the state, I don't even think it makes sense to consider an individual as having the capacity to understand themselves away from cultural and social influences, and I think the state is part of that. So it's difficult. Plant-based diet and does not equal vegan. I completely agree, Louis. Do, do, do. Disdain towards bestiality is something I might have considered innate in the past, but there is an uncomfortable Vice YouTube video about North African Colombian culture that proves otherwise. Well, yeah, I mean, like, it's not just that. I mean, like, it's not even just, like, you know, typical examples of it, but also the fact that there's no reason to believe that there is anything mechanistically within us that describes us, that what makes us human, as perpetually showing this disdain. Like, if people can be conditioned out of it and come to, you know, enjoy it, and the fact that people do enjoy it, it's kind of like no reason to believe that anything to do with what behavior is actually natural in origin anyway. Did I use vegan ink for my tattoos? Actually did. Some of the tattoos I got before I was vegan, but then when I got tattooed after I was vegan, I made sure it was vegan ink. It wasn't hard. Most of them are vegan. Not hard at all. So yeah. That does make sense, but on the other hand, is someone who wants animal products but no access vegan? No, I don't think that's someone who, let's say, is forced to be, like, vegan is an ideological rejection of animal product consumption. What it means to be vegan is to decide that it is unethical to consume animal products and then act in accordance with that ethic. It's an ideological principle. The idea that someone could, you know, essentially just be vegan because they don't have, like, are people vegan when they're sleeping? No, they're not. Like, being a vegan is not just is not being able to access animal products. It's essentially the deliberate avoidance of animal products. It's a philosophy and a way of living, and I think that's the way I would word it. Yeah. That's exactly right, Elliot. B12 is made by bacteria and is not exclusive to animals. Can I ethically eat a plant that is a product of dead animals? Do you mean like organic farming or something that you like? How the hell would that make sense? Like, look, like, if no animal was killed for you to make the plant, then yeah. What about horrible animals like crocodiles? What's wrong with geese? I don't even think crocodiles are not necessarily horrible. I just don't really want to get eaten by one. I'm to be fair, I think they're quite, like, vicious and nasty, but, like, I don't necessarily hate them or anything. There's nothing horrible about them except for the willingness to murder you, I guess. Beyond Meat ground is perfect for making yummy chili. I haven't tried that. I will give that a go. Well, hello. Hello, hello, hello. Well, hello. Hello, well. Hello, well. Well, hello, well. Stateless anarchy for the Ancon utopia of the year 2222, when humans ethically self-actualize beyond our need for central justice systems. There is no such thing as going beyond the central justice system, because the central justice system is an inherent part of how we understand the centralized and universal nature of the self. That's why it's so important. It's not just the fact that we construct laws. It's that the laws are themselves rational constructions of what it means to be a member of our society. Anyway, I'd argue that there are concepts where bestiality is accepted in society. The jackass, what was that? Where'd that go? The jackass guys drank horse semen and people didn't care much. That is kind of fucking disgusting. Why? Why would you do that to yourself? I know that the self-harm, like, constantly, which actually raises a question that we will just consume, like, comedy of someone just smacking themselves with a hammer or something and be like, haha, they're in agony now, which is kind of messed up. Hello, Will Smith. I'm so glad Will Smith has joined the chat. I wish you were the real Will Smith. I used to love Will Smith movies. I don't actually dislike any Will Smith movie that I can think of, to be honest. And I thought Wild Wild West was really good. So, yeah. I think iRobot's probably one of my favorites. Anyway. Would you argue that people can be conditioned to believe literally anything given the correct circumstances? Yes. Yes, I would literally train someone to look at a cave wall their entire life. You can have vegan leather. You don't need animals. Geese are funny to look at, lol. Yeah, I would probably agree. I think geese are kind of funny to look at. Big PP, have you seen that they have a vegan chef on Gordon Ramsay's show? No, really, does it? Really? Oh, that's pretty cool. Gordon Ramsay's famously anti-vegan, for no reason, for no reason. I don't know why. I don't know why the man has got to be this way. He's just kind of a dick. And I know that his character is a dick, but there's one thing about just being a dick of a character for a TV show, and then there's another about actually perpetuating harm upon countless billions of animals for your own reputation and self-satisfaction. Animals are killed whilst harvesting plants all the time in huge numbers. This is true, Mr. Laugh, and most crops are fed to animals, so we actually kill a lot of animals in order to feed animals to then kill and eat. So if you want to stop killing animals, the best thing to do is to not kill animals. What a surprise. No, if you don't eat them, you don't need as many crops. If you don't need as many crops, less animals die in crop production, which means being vegan ultimately leads to less crop deaths, and that is quite obviously seen. So yeah. Geese chase scorners whenever I see that. It's reparations, baby. Maybe I think that the unfortunate thing is that I think that it all the geese never really get I don't know, man. I've never seen a geese actually chase someone. Geese nah, I've never actually seen that happen. I've seen swans get mad. I got a swan once got mad at me, and that was a scary experience. Mainly because I didn't expect it to be so aggressive. It was so mad. It was so mad. I was like, oh my god, this swan's mad. So yeah. If crocodiles were anthropomorphized, I feel like it'd be warranted to be racist against them. Whoa! That's a bit far. What do you got against crocodiles, man? That's next level, in this fictional universe where crocodiles eventually evolve to be hominids. Hominid? Is that right? I think that's right. Humanoid. Then we could be prejudiced against them. It's a bit fucked up, man. What do I think about Noam Chomsky's response to Dr. Ravi? What? Noam Chomsky responded to Dr. Ravi. All right, you got to find us that. I've got to see that. See you later. Is that Ismail? Thank you very much for checking out the stream. Really appreciate it. How would you respond to someone who doesn't base their fundamental moral values of subjectivity of the mind? Well, it depends on what they are basing it off, and I would try and explain why I would say subjectivity was valuable in and of itself. I would probably recommend that you check out my objective ethics video. Hancock was a really good movie, actually. I enjoyed Hancock. I was was it Call Me Asshole one more time? Best vegan food. Well, like most things that you eat can be vegan, right? Like you can get like loads of like vegan stuff. So whatever your favorite food is, it's probably you can probably get a vegan version of it now. Um, what would be like my favorite? Like in terms of like substitutes and replacements and stuff, probably like Richmond vegan Richmond sausages are really great. Is naturalism ever a good argument for anything? No. Well, I mean, look, it depends on what you mean by naturalism, right? Like, you could have like natural law, and arguably that's naturalism. Is that a vegan Richmond sausage? Oh, I'll just prove to the stream. I won't eat it on the stream. Too hot. Oh, of course. I'm just being taunted now. Okay. Shows food off camera and then just say no, you can't have it. Vegan capitalism is based. Nah, man, I want that vegan like anarchal socialism. Like, when am I gonna live in my ideal world? Wait. You enjoyed Wild Wild West? This is not insanity. The Matrix. Okay, yeah, okay. Men in Black. Men in Black. That actually was such a good film. Oh my god, I love Men in Black. Anyway, sorry. Yeah, and I know that he turned down Wild Wild West, turned down The Matrix for Wild Wild West. But right, if he hadn't have done that, I don't think Will Smith would have made as good of a Neo because he's not as like serious as Keanu, or at least serious looking as Keanu. Like where Keanu's like always like, you know, like actually, how does Keanu always look? Can't do it. Damn. What? Iran named the trait on Chomsky. How did that go? Like, how did that? Why can't we just do marginal cases? Why can't you just say like, "Oh, we justified"? Why do we have to go? What is true of a human? And it's. I'm sorry, right? I do hate the way that name the trait is structured. The only thing good about name the trait is the name. It is literally marginal cases that's done in a way that's just weird. Like, well, now if we have a disembodied crocodile ghost human, can we kill that? No. Well, congratulations. You've reached absurd. And honestly, I just don't get the argument. And no offense to them. It's not for me. I just prefer marginal cases. Yeah. Can we teach animal ethics or morals? Yeah, absolutely. 100%. 100% believe that you could teach ethics. I think ethics is a rational pursuit. I would argue ethics is a purely, it comes from reason. I believe it is derived from reason. So yeah, 100%. The science of right, as Hegel would call it. Thoughts on animal testing? Animal testing is unethical. It's unnecessary and it's unethical. A great example of why animal testing doesn't work is actually thalidomide. Thalidomide was a pregnancy drug that was given to many pregnant women that caused birth defects, and it was tested a lot on animals and pregnant animals. Didn't cause birth defects in any of those animals, only in humans, because humans are biologically distinct from those animals. A lot of the time, animal testing is inadequate to actually show whether something is safe or not for humans. What's better is things like culture testing on human tissues and so on, and then obviously human trials once done. And I think that the idea of animal testing, the idea of putting an animal through and potentially risking an animal's life, and then actually usually killing the animal in order to be or for the data itself, is unjustified. Like the fact that we would, let's say, get rabbits like June's pets, for example, and then poison them with chemicals that don't necessarily harm you at first, but will just give them enough until they are poisoned, in order to see how long it takes to poison a rabbit. It seems to be pointless to me. Not only is it pointless, but it defies their ability to consent. And the worst part of it is that we would do this to an innocent creature, an innocent like rabbit, or a dog, or a monkey, or something like that. And at the same time, a murderer will be given more respect within prison. We would see that doing this to people in prison would be highly unethical. Yet they have taken it upon themselves to take the life of another, and all this rabbit's done has been, all its crime was being born a rabbit. Should we interfere with wild animal suffering? Well, I don't know if we can at the minute, but I think once we've got, the capacity to do so in a way that is genuinely scientifically backed, like gene drives, and having a conception of what we would do to the environment in a way that would not just be foolhardy, then yeah, I think so. I think we should intervene. You thought my conversation with interspecies was much easier to understand than my objective ethics video. Well then, yeah, check out my conversation with interspecies if that's easier. Yeah, and thanks for turning up, interspecies. Actually, see you later. Converse Contender, I sent you the gnome clip on Discord. All right, thanks very much, Converse Contender. 47 Ronin. I haven't seen that yet. I don't think that's a Will Smith movie. I've been loving your return to YouTube. You're such an underrated, rational, and smart person. Thanks. Thanks, Whoosh. Thanks. Bruh. Have you all got a favorite vegan burger? I would actually say, Aldi's no beef burgers are probably the best ones. I know that sounds stupid, but I think they genuinely are the best ones. The Beyond Meat ones are pretty cool. The No Bull ones are pretty cool. But Aldi's no beef is probably the best. It's just like, not only is it like at a fair price, but it actually tastes nice. So yeah, I'd actually say that. Internationally, it's probably going to be something like Beyond Meat, something like that. If I'm vegan and raise chickens in an ethical manner, well, there we are. We've already done this. It depends on how you got the chickens for the first place. So like chickens themselves, if you buy chickens like for like egg laying hens, for example, they're actually produced from eggs which could from fertilized eggs which could either be male or female. And so when the males are born, they're just blended up. They just put them in a macerator and blend them. They don't care about them. They're not considered at all. So like they actually buying the chickens, like the hens, is in and of itself like perpetuating suffering. And then obviously in terms of if you did rescue them from slaughter, though, that's a different scenario. So you can actually get chickens who are going to go to slaughter and you can rescue them, and I think that's fair. Obviously don't support the industry though, because if you do support the industry, you're just going to put another chicken through slaughter as well. So don't go buying chickens, because that'll buy someone else. They'll put another chicken in the system because you've demanded it. But yeah, if you are going to get chickens which are, they're not going to get like sold for food because they're of too low quality and stuff, quote unquote, then yeah, you then do that. Like save those chickens. Can you eat their eggs? I would probably recommend you don't. One, because chickens, if you have a chicken and it lays its egg, it's actually attached to that egg until it realizes it's not fertile, and then it'll probably abandon that egg. Once it abandons that egg, then yeah, whatever. But if you take it before that point, not only is it distressed, but it also then lays another egg. It attempts, its body starts producing more eggs, and then they start like essentially leaching calcium from their bones and so on. What I would recommend is that if these chickens are abandoning their eggs, you have them, you've rescued them, they're abandoning their eggs, and you're going to keep them after they're spent. Obviously, you're not just keeping chickens to essentially produce eggs, and that like more like companions and pets and stuff. Then yeah, like I would say that feed them their egg if you can, because they will eat their eggs, which benefits them as they get the calcium back. But if they won't, or you're supplementing their diet with calcium or whatever, anyway, I don't really care what you do with the egg. I don't give a shit. I don't think the chicken care, as long as there's no harm being perpetuated and as long as you're respecting them, I don't think it's necessarily immoral. But I think that's a very like niche scenario. So yeah. How would you justify high taxes? I struggle to explain why I believe high taxes are a justified. Well, I don't necessarily justify high tax. I wouldn't necessarily justify high tax. If I'm honest, I think redistribution is kind of part of the problem, and I think Robert Nozick actually points this out. Like he actually makes this point really well, where he's like, we don't need to fix redistribution, we need to fix distribution. Distribution is the point of exploitation. He's right wing, but in terms of a left wing dialogue on this, I think distribution is the point of exploitation of the worker. And if we fix distribution, we don't have to worry about redistributing the wealth in the first place to the same degree. Also, I think that taxation should be market wide. When if you did have a socialist market, like market socialism or something like that, yeah, then I think it should be market wide. Like we provide certain like key infrastructural needs for the market to function, like healthcare, education, and so on. And then tax just has to be as high as it needs to be in order to provide, you know, essentially that that mandate. But overall, I don't think you can impede the private property of another individual greater than anyone else, unless there is a reason for that. The reason that we tax the rich higher is typically because the rich have it to tax because they've gained a surplus of wealth, usually because of the way capitalism works. It exploits low level production, and you know people with wealth gain from that, like you know the capitalist class, the bourgeois, and all that. If you accept the Marxist distinctions, but the upper classes or the owners, or the you know the employers, you know, so richer employers, and employees. Employees get exploited. Employers do the exploiting, and so they typically have greater overall wealth. Typically, not always. You do get employees who are well paid. Happens. But I would say that it's also the way that private property works. It's actually, you know, you're being alienated. It's not just about wealth, but yeah. Yeah, but in terms of taxation, I don't necessarily advocate for high taxes anyway. I don't know if high taxes, even on a liberalist sense. Like, I'm not a liberal. I don't think that this system works that well if we start like, right, what we're going to do is tax the shit out of people because wealth production then slows down. And when wealth production slows down, then we'll have less wealth to tax and it becomes complex. So taxing people like is complicated. From a liberalist perspective, but I'm not a liberal. I'm a socialist. So I think all of that is dumb. So yeah, like I think that the way that we should approach it is, we necessarily have to pay for something in the market. We all pay a unilateral tax, like a standard tax. Everyone pays 10% or something like that, and you know we aren't allowed to engage in certain behaviors, and we're also all guaranteed certain necessities like food, water, shelter, healthcare, education. For the market to function. And yeah, that's what I would say. Like, yeah. Watership Down did have a lot of rabbit murders, and that was very nasty. I did not enjoy that. I have not seen that film. Moro? I don't know if I'm saying your name right there. Wouldn't we look at overall benefits of testing animals? Surely one drug that I'm not a utilitarian. So I'm not going to say like, well, look, if we could tie someone to a table and test a drug on them and it would cure cancer, no, it doesn't make it okay. No, don't go and kidnap people from the streets and start testing drugs on them, you fucking maniac. Organ harvesting's wrong. Well, a lot of but sure, maybe the drug tested on animals did have negative effects on humans later, but this is the case with most of them. A lot of drugs, it's not like one or two drugs. There's quite a few drugs that are not safe for humans that don't get picked up by animal testing, but there's also drugs that are safe for humans that get rejected from animal testing. So it has the double effect of eliminating drugs that are safe for us. A great example is penicillin. Penicillin can kill a lot of animals. It does not kill us. It's actually a very important antibiotic for us, and it's saved millions, if not billions, of lives. So I don't know if billions. maybe billions. I'm not sure. Millions of lives. So yeah, like definitely, yeah, like animal testing is not very good. But the what I was saying is that, in terms of the exploitation of animals as well, like, look, like, animals have value in and of themselves, and exploiting them for our own benefit, no matter how many humans benefit, is not justified. It's the same thing, unless we were to say that it would be justified doing it to a human as well. Is there any merit to panpsychism? In my opinion, yeah, I think there's a merit to it. I don't agree with it necessarily. I'm like a humanist. I'm a sentientist actually, so I think, or an objective idealist in this sense. I believe that the world is a construction of consciousness, and that I think that we all exist. That what exists can only be attributed to that which we are capable of being conscious of. So yeah. I don't know how I feel about direct action in terms of veganism. I don't know how I feel about like kidnapping animals and stuff. Like on a mass scale or anything like that. When someone kidnaps a animal, I'm happy. I'm happy to see the animal's not going to get slaughtered anymore. But I don't think it necessarily makes the situation any better. Um it kind of makes vegans seem crazy, makes you out as a terrorist organization, that we're unethical. I don't think that necessarily perpetuates the change we want it to, and I think it can end up causing more harm than good sometimes. So, direct action, I don't necessarily see it as being effective. That's the main issue. If I'm honest, I don't have that much of a moral qualm with thieving animals, like from farms. Like, I'm not going to say that someone's a bad person because they saved someone else from slaughter. That would be nonsense. But at the same time, I don't think it's necessarily effective forms of activism, and that's my concern. It ends up like there was vegans that were like smashing up butcher shops and stuff and spray painting, like vandalizing, and it's like, look, that's probably going to lead the local area to fucking hate you and the movement. It's like protests, like show the local like cube of truth or something outside of the butcher shop, like show people that when they're going in there, this is what they're paying for. That's better, and it's probably something distressing, and we're probably going to get hated for it anyway. But at least it's in a way in which they can't just point out and say like, look, we're mad, we're crazy, and we're a threat, and we need eliminated. Don't give them any weapons to use against her. Um, what problems do I have with Marxism? The materialism is a big thing. Like essentially, the understanding of an individual and through ideological conditions which are materially originated, I think is poor. I think that an individual understands the material conditions through ideology in the first place. That's why we have things like relative poverty. That's why we have you know that's why we have things like capitalist exploitation and so on in the first place, because an individual materialistically desires more and more regardless of how much they actually get, and concepts of felicity and so on. But I would even go so far as to say that the individual themselves and this whole capitalist regime is better understood from a Hegelian perspective, which is idealist, or an ideological perspective, which understands our relationship with the phenomena to be produced partly through our understanding and conception of it. So when we engage in understanding material, it's not it has more to do with how we conceive of the material in which we are trying to appropriate. And so our relationship with material is mediated in a way that essentially allows us to subject object divide ourselves from our surroundings, but also from other people. And this is why Hegelian recognition and the understanding of class actually occurs. It's prior to the existence of material in the first place, which is how classes would develop in terms of like our relationship with our own desires, our relationship with what is appropriate for who we are to act. And this is how people could associate with things like slavery. This is how people could associate with things like with being a worker and being or a serf, and things like that. These identities themselves are prior to our relationship with material and determine our relationship with material, and are not determined by the material contentions in the first place. So yeah. How do I feel about the concept of antinatalism? Honestly, I'm more favorable to antinatalism than pronatalism, like people who are like go forth and multiply. But I don't think that there is necessarily an antinatalist position which holds true, as in a universal concept of antinatalism, a universal principle where we say that we should not have kids. I haven't actually heard an argument by an antinatalist which is capable of having such grounding. I think the most detailed conversation I had on antinatalism, because I've had quite a few debates, and every one of them has been, bar Superhuman Dance, has been very educated and very well read and very capable of arguing the position, whether it's been question mark Mark, whether it's been Steve Godfrey, whether it's been Seven of Swords. Who else have I debated? I feel like I'm leaving someone out. And I can't remember who. Sorry if I've left you out. But you're not Superhuman Dance, so I probably think you're smart. So, yeah. This is, like, all of them have been really capable. And they've got really interesting positions, and I can understand why they're coming from their positions. Seven of Swords provide the most detailed conversation on that in the same language I use as a continental. And that was probably the conversation that I think I enjoyed on antinatalism the most, just because of the continental like feel of the conversation. Superhuman Dance is just he's just what do I think of effective altruism? I need to I get the point, like, you know, how we can actively like it's like the most good you can do kind of thing. I think that Peter Singer in his effective altruism doesn't necessarily take into consideration one's responsibility for not only the harm that they do, but also our duties to those around us. I do think you have a greater responsibility for your family and so on than you do for random strangers, and he would disagree. So rather live in a universe where humans eventually are aware of all truths, but they are never at peace, or in a universe determined to be at peace, but will never know the truth. Well, here's the thing, Max. That's like hypothetically, I would say that the hypothetical is wrong, because one, I would say that the only way that we'd be able to have knowledge in order to perpetuate the norms of peace would be through, knowing the truth, gaining an understanding of where we are and our place within the universe. But also, when you talk about determined, I don't think that human behavior can be determined, and I think that a lack of knowledge and ignorance can perpetuate the very thing which leads us to war and conflict in these horrid scenarios in the first place. So, yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong, if you are saying, like, look, if I had to choose between a universe at peace and a universe not at peace, then of course I'm going to choose the universe at peace. But in terms of whether it would get there through a non-rational, non-truth-based scenario, I don't believe so. I don't think that it is possible. And if it did, it would be through pure luck more than anything, and could destabilize at any moment. What do I say about divine command morals? I would say that it's circular, that it rejects the very foundations of subjectivity from which they would need to be required in order for language to be capable of discovering what is actually meant in scripture. So, in other words, I would say that language, being a game which is aimed towards representing and replicating a certain object-subject relationship within the world, is referential to our own experiences. And so if it is one-sided, as in I am being told what good is, then I never have access to what that good actually is, which means I can never have knowledge of the good, which forever alienates it from me, and so I can never know whether the actual command was justified or not. And so I'm basing it on my notion of whether your command is good, which means what I'm actually justifying is like your power over me. Like, should I believe that you are telling me the truth, and why? Should I believe, and what am I going to use for that? Your notions of good, what you're telling me to do. It just becomes a master-slave dialectic from which I'm alienated from the actual foundations of the ethic. So no, I think divine command is terrible. And also, like, I mean, like, it's the Euthyphro dilemma, isn't it? You know, is it good because God says it's good, or is it good and that's why God says it? You know, that's the good old Euthyphro dilemma or whatever. What is carnism? Carnism is the ideology that perpetuates the exploitation of animals. So, like, it is the natural norm. It's the normal state in which an individual within our society ideologically associates themselves with animals. That animals are there to be exploited. That you can eat animals. That you can use leather and so on. This is what's called carnism. That animals are there to like be exploited or exploitable. Diminished ethical consideration of animals as the other. Our teeth are no good for eating roots. Our teeth aren't good at eating anything that's not cooked. And there was actually a really interesting anthropologist who argues this. He says, we are not omnivores, we are croctivores, beings who eat cooked food. If you put our teeth next to even our nearest relative, like the bonobo and the chimpanzee, their teeth are huge. They're just much stronger than us. Like, they're much different to us. Because what they're eating requires them to like have like to be able to chew harder and chew like harder foods, like when the foods are eaten. The food that we eat is soft as hell because we cook it. And you know, tubers and so on are like roots are soft when you cook it. Even like meat, like we don't have like canines like if you ever look at an omnivore, like a natural omnivore, or a like a bear or something, or a cat in terms of carnivore, or a dog in terms of an omnivore, or something like that teeth are made to rip and tear, and they have these like the canines that are capable of actually like doing the job. Like humans have these blunt little like teeny. I need to clean. I actually need to, like I'm gonna have I think it's this light. I don't think my teeth are that bad, but like we have these teeny little like canines. If Marx was a bare-headed person, and was about to eat Hegel, who was a fish-legged person, would we still make fun of Vorsch? Yes. How would you argue against religion with someone? See it best to point out the circularity and show that they have no substantive justification or rational base, such as logic. Why are you arguing against religion? Like, do you need to argue against, like, for example, the concept of a divine being is necessarily not irrational. It's when they start arguing for things that are irrational in terms of ethics that I would pull them up. People can have a relationship with the divine. I have no real problem with that. And like theism or you know, if like they're Buddhists, I have no real problem with what they're doing in terms of having a belief. The problem comes from when they start perpetuating harmful ideological constructs that, you know, try to perpetuate some sort of unethical relationship. That's when it becomes an issue. What do I think about psychedelics and people's trip reports regarding God realization? Man, like one, I don't believe that. Like, look, you're not gonna like if you've got to if you take a load of like, I don't believe in private knowledge. It doesn't exist. So if it's something that you've came to this realization from your own personal experience from which I can't access, yeah, it's not knowledge. I can't verify or falsify whether it was actually God. You might have been seeing a demon and you thought it was God. Like, I don't know. Like, it's non-accessible, so I don't take that as evidence for God. If it leads them to a form of belief, good for them. I don't really care. If it, you know, but yeah, that's it really. Yeah. I have no problem with people having a relationship with the divine as long as they just don't do unethical things. Um, um, that is true. You cannot get chemicals from supplements the same way as meat. Like you do get chemicals from meat that you can't get in supplements. I do agree, Cosine. Um, like antibiotics, and the number one, cause of antibiotic resistance is the consumption of meat, isn't it? The consumption of animal products. So yeah, like the very same antibiotics we depend upon in order to save our lives at crucial moments, being fed to us 3 times a day, because of our selfish desire to consume animal products. Can't get that from a B12 supplement. See, Corsin, that's where you're wrong. Meat is not a necessary evil. Meat is necessarily evil. We don't need meat to survive. I've been 6 years vegan. I'm healthy, and I know many other vegans that are healthy. The American and British Dietetics Associations both say a vegan diet is suitable for all forms of life, for all stages of life, not all forms of life. I'm pretty sure there are animals that can't eat a vegan diet. What do I base my morality on? Just go check out my objective ethics video. Check it out. Do I ever talk about music on here? Favorite artists? Not usually. I mean, like, my favorite artist overall is Linkin Park. Like, I love Linkin Park. Like, it's like my favorite band, like, from childhood. I like it. Like, I like a lot of stuff. I like a lot of alternative music, like politically charged stuff as well. So yeah. Can I please debunk Leo Gura's philosophy? I don't know who that is, man. Check that out. Where do I get my collagen from? Don't we all naturally produce collagen, man? Like, collagen production stops at a certain age, though, which is why people struggle with that. That's whether you eat or don't eat meat. You can consume collagen, but I don't think it necessarily increases your collagen count anyway. But yeah, I'm pretty sure we entirely synthesize collagen. Okay. It is now 1:43 here. I'm going to bail, guys. And I hope you've all enjoyed the stream. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. Consider subscribing. If you want to see more streams and videos, really plan on producing more content. And as always, try to gain some perspective.